Hello, everyone. My name is Laine McCrory. I'm a graduate student in the Joint Program in Communication and Culture at Toronto Metropolitan University and York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Today, I will be detailing research that aims to unite policy, feminist science studies, and critical artificial intelligence studies to ask central questions about the future of smart cities and smart city governance. So, what makes a city smart, and how do we govern the smart city? In 2014, Mark Andrejevic and Mark Burden argued that cities are experiencing a transformation in the way that data is used. Rather than viewing data as something to be collected or targeted in discrete forms, they depict a sensor society, where the process of data collection occurs ubiquitously. Key to this idea of the sensor society is the notion that a city's performance is dependent on a constant state of data collection, amelioration, and mobilization under the goals of optimization, scalability, and efficiency. In the smart city, this idea really comes to life. While fully functional smart cities remain mainly as aspirations, these aspirations are united in their goals of integrating networked infrastructure, big data, machine learning processes, and data analytics into the daily functioning of a city. From self-driving cars to trash removal to health records, a large-scale smart city integrates the uniting of data, prediction, and networks to optimize city life. Yet underlying these aspirations are questions of power, justice, and control. Within this presentation, I argue that any governance framework that focuses on smart cities must engage with these questions. Here, a feminist approach becomes essential, as feminist science and technology scholars position artificial intelligence and data collection as processes that reify hierarchies and produce systems of unequal power. This approach challenges the presentation of smart cities as neutral and universally beneficial, instead underscoring how technological solutions often replicate harmful realities of marginalization. Here, I draw on the work of key critical AI scholars such as Kay Crawford, Louisa Moore, and Ruha Benjamin to argue that a rhetoric of neutrality and depoliticization ignores the need for multiple and varied perspectives to potential solutions for key urban problems. Applying a feminist lens to both this case and future policy implications is an integral step to building these solutions, as it works directly to challenge universalism and expose unequal power relations. Developing stronger algorithmic governance procedures requires this rejection in order to center values of meaningful participation and accountability procedures, so that these unequal power structures can continue to be exposed and challenged. I'll be spending the next 20 minutes or so approaching these questions through a critical case study of Sidewalk Labs Quayside Project in Toronto, Ontario. I'll further explore how policymakers can approach key questions that arise when we're talking about smart city developments. I'll first introduce the case of Sidewalk Labs and detail the key pitfalls that occurred within it. Then I will spend the remainder of my presentation discussing an alternative feminist policy framework that's centered on values of participation and localized governance. Finally, I'm going to conclude with pathways for future research and a final summary of policy implications. In the mid-2000s, Waterfront Toronto, a nonprofit organization founded in collaboration with the three levels of government in Canada, purchased a plot of land in Toronto that would later house the Quayside Project for $68 million. In 2017, Sidewalk Labs, a subsidiary of Alphabet Incorporated, was announced as the winner of a request for proposals to develop the land. Sidewalk Labs proposed a smart community that would integrate self-driving cars, environmentally safe and temperature-controlled buildings, smart trash removal, artificially moderated health records, and even more digital interventions, all to benefit the general public with an efficient and optimized community. Between 2017 and 2019, they would host 5 public roundtables, establish a residence panel, and publish the long-awaited development plan. Yet with each public engagement activity, Sidewalk Labs faced concerns from residents surrounding the logistics and monetization of data, with residents and academics questioning how control, management, and personal information would be ensured to be anonymous and ensured to be in control of the residents themselves. As an answer to these questions, Sidewalk Labs argued that the information gathered in the public realm, including publicly accessible spaces and certain private buildings, would be categorized as urban data and held in a trust. Yet, the category of urban data is non-existent within Canadian legislation, leaving no precedent for an urban data trust to work from. While data trusts have been presented as potential solutions to issues of ambiguous data governance, this proposal highlights how accountability becomes difficult when corporate actors ignore the diverse needs of a community in order to define their own data governance methods. For this reason, the Quayside Project is an integral case study. Due to its unique data categorizations, lack of meaningful public engagement opportunities, and an overall categorization of solutionist rhetoric, this project demonstrates the need for a strong governance framework. To conduct this research and to lay out this framework, I analyzed a series of corporate communications and proposals put forth by Sidewalk Labs, as well as activist responses and citizen feedback. Through the project, I stayed committed to utilizing a feminist analytical framework that exposes systems of power and control to understand how hierarchies of knowledge are reified in smart city development and governance processes. Throughout the development stage, the Quayside Project faced a plethora of challenges from government, citizens, and activists alike. Ultimately, in 2020, the project was abandoned, and while the official communication cited financial constraints and COVID-19 as the primary reasons, my analysis demonstrates two alternative pitfalls that the project faced. First, the project failed to develop informed consent amongst the community, instead treating community feedback as an additive feature rather than a central aspect of the project's development. We then see a second pitfall of a prioritization of corporate governance. Public-private partnerships involving data collection in Toronto are bound by three pieces of legislation: the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection Act, and the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. All three of these legislations highlight how consent and the ability to opt out are essential to privacy protection. In proposing urban data as an entirely new category, Sidewalk Labs was able to sidestep each of these regulations because urban data does not exist within them. Instead, the concept of personal data only applies to these laws. Categorizing this collection as urban data neglected the need for consent and participation that are required by law. This key pitfall was identified by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, who launched a lawsuit against the corporation under the argument that citizens would be unable to meaningfully opt out of data collection within the space. In this case, individuals have no ability to opt out of algorithmic decision-making while in the neighborhood. Their only option was to avoid the area entirely. However, simply telling people not to enter a public neighborhood isn't a sufficient proposal for consent and opting out. More broadly, this pitfall really highlights that Sidewalk Labs' approach to governing urban data merely provided weak transparency rather than actual accountability. Merely providing information is not enough when approaching smart city governance. Rather, these governance procedures need to provide residents and citizens with the tools to critically evaluate the information that they're given. Informed and participatory consent within digital policy is incredibly important, and it's an important practice for ensuring ethical technological development and intervention. Integrating a new type of data alongside no clear legislative protections fails to ensure that legitimate consent is possible. The second pitfall involves the promotion of corporate governance throughout the course of the project. In order to regulate this new category of data, Sidewalk Labs created the Urban Data Trust, which was an external regulatory body responsible for making decisions surrounding data within the Quayside neighborhood. This proposal highlights how data governance becomes difficult when corporate actors are defining the rules of the game. Within the Urban Data Trust, it was identified that decisions would be made with an appointed independent regulatory body who would decide how to share the data, but they would decide according to Sidewalk Labs' own responsible data use guidelines. In turning residents' data into assets for evaluation, the trust aimed to establish data as an infrastructural element of urban life, rather than as part of a transactional relationship where those who are giving their data deserve a level of accountability and control over it. The establishment of their own criteria for responsible data use, combined with the creation of an entirely new form of data, essentially makes Sidewalk Labs the new expert in the ethical use of data in cities. This was compounded by a lack of government consultation. Throughout the entire project, there was an overall failure to clearly consult with Waterfront Toronto's Intergovernmental Steering Committee. The committee was consistently in the dark regarding decisions surrounding Quayside. The Ontario Auditor General found that the committee was only made aware that Sidewalk Labs had actually won the project merely 5 days before the announcement to the public. Furthermore, the lack of government consultation is evident in the proposal of the data trust itself, where there was no clear integration of legislation within the framework. Ultimately, these pitfalls led to the creation of a project based on determinism, universalism, and privatization. The challenge to public-private partnerships in urban smart environments highlights that for corporate actors, there's an increased incentive to collect data en masse within the city. Here, the ability to constantly collect and distribute key informational data about a community is a valuable resource within the 21st century. And as corporate actors retain their position as the sole experts, they're able to promote forms of universalism and self-regulation. In favoring universalism over a localized understanding of urban issues, smart cities ignore context and systemic issues in search of profit. When viewed through a feminist lens that aims to expose hierarchies of power, these pitfalls represent deeper systemic issues regarding mass surveillance and human rights. As Sidewalk Labs aim to promote an environment where technology solves all issues, the Quayside Project ignored the risks that a hyper-surveilled space poses to certain populations. Creating seemingly innovative solutions without considering their full socio-political impacts creates the potential for further marginalization of people who are already experiencing harm from these technologies at multiple intersectional levels. Urban life cannot and should not be reduced to mere data points. Data is not a universal, uncomplicated answer. In promoting an intersectional feminist praxis within data policy, I build from feminist critiques of objectivity, and I argue that we need to be viewing the smart city as consisting of multiple interactions within different contexts, and these contexts existing within hierarchies and systems of power. Smart cities are not representative of merely goals of optimization and efficiency, but are reminiscent of greater socio-technical contexts. The final section of this presentation outlines an alternative framework to smart city governance that doesn't promise universal solutions, but instead highlights the strength of a contextualized and localized approach. Rather than relying on corporate actors to define contexts, concepts, and outcomes, I turn towards members of the community who are working towards changing the ways both cities and algorithms are designed. Learning from these interventions, policymakers can understand the strength of an intersectional and localized approach to algorithmic governance within the city. The first key pillar involves participation in design. Rather than treating participation as an additive, I argue that any approach to smart city governance needs to ensure meaningful engagement throughout the course of the project. While urban bureaucracy constantly faces a complaint of slowness, I argue for leaning into the idea of slow. From a feminist perspective, moving slow integrates collaboration from the start, working to develop technological solutions in tandem with the communities they're meant to serve. It also involves creating concrete accountability measures where the public can actually understand what happens to their data. While slowness is accompanied by frustration and a feeling of being out of the loop, this alternative articulation emphasizes the need for early onset collaboration. In this framework, residents are viewed as direct collaborators, rather than as an additive feature later on in the process. There are many groups that are currently working on these approaches. The Design Justice Framework, popularized by Sasha Costanza-Chalk, presents key ways that stakeholders can engage with members of the community in meaningful environments, and in doing so, how they can cultivate a feeling of mutual trust and understanding. This important work is already being done by groups publishing different outlets such as the Critical Engineering Manifesto, the Feminist Data Manifest No, and the More Than Code report, who each highlight the importance of design as a process that involves meaningful engagement with those who are most impacted by technology. Second, I want to emphasize the need for proactive policymaking focused on collective rights, shared prosperity, and intersectionality. In the same way that design needs to be an ongoing process of consent, governance similarly needs to ensure multiple avenues for public consultation. In AI governance scenarios in the EU, the UK, and Canada, we're seeing a move towards rights-based approaches to governance. However, these approaches often fall short, receiving criticism for their focus on individual rights rather than collective intersectional impacts. Governance in the age of artificial intelligence requires meaningful citizen engagement in order to address the intersectional and far-reaching impacts of technology. Therefore, a critical policy intervention should ensure that human rights of residents are not sacrificed in the development of these policies. I argue that this assurance can be provided with a focus on localized governance. My articulation of localism here draws from Katz and Novak's, in which local jurisdictions are approaching a broad range of issues through a decentralized, not fragmented approach. In New York, San Francisco, Helsinki, Amsterdam, and Barcelona, there's been an increase in specifically localized approaches to regulating AI. While there are certain inalienable rights, such as the right to privacy, this approach builds on these rights to encourage a collaborative policy approach. So, utilizing the skills that other municipalities have developed in order to find what fits best for a community's goals and needs. This aspect of localized governance achieves an overall cultivation of trust within a community. Gaining meaningful transparency itself is a process that not only engages the public, but also stakeholders, governing bodies, and corporations themselves. Ensuring the interpretability of transparency, therefore, is necessary to developing this culture of trust, as accountability can only be enacted when civilians can trust and understand how a system is changing and why it needs to change in the first place. There are many avenues to explore this front, learning from AI localism initiatives, or potentially integrating citizen juries or mini publics as permanent evaluation bodies. So, taking a feminist approach to this framework involves understanding the relationship between policy and participation as one of mutual influence, where experiences of marginalized and at-risk communities, those who are often not seen, are valued. As such, there's certain key considerations for policymaking. So, a feminist framework combats current approaches to AI governance that are based on soft law or principles alone, ensuring a form of governance that centers those who are impacted rather than corporations and assures that accountability goals can be met. Second, it promotes a culture of trust. I'm not arguing for an abandonment of smart technology in its entirety, but I'm instead arguing that in engaging with a variety of stakeholders, trustworthy and localized technological approaches can be developed. A final consideration is actually twofold. So, strong legal structures can promote accountability and literacy while ensuring that collective impacts and intersectionality is always a present value. This framework both ensures that civilians are not alienated from their city while acknowledging the socio-technical risks of AI. Overall, a feminist approach to smart city governance addresses the risks of rapid datafication while integrating an intersectional, impact-based community engagement process. This ensures that civilians can be protected under a rights-based legal structure that understands the multifaceted risks posed by AI, while also giving citizens the tools to hold people accountable, whether that's corporations, governance, or their other community members. The consequences of Sidewalk Labs Quayside Project are reflective of a broader issue in the governance of smart infrastructure. This project reflected deeper concerns about the consequences of public-private partnerships and the development of these programs, as they often fail to address the disproportionate risks that algorithmic decision-making poses to marginalized groups. When corporate actors are able to develop and set their own precedent for the storage, collection, and usage of data, citizens are not ensured that their rights will be protected by legislation. Now more than ever, there is a need for a comprehensive and strong governance mechanism that prioritizes consent and participation. I've highlighted that the need for a governance framework that meaningfully engages with those who will be put in harm's way through the mass integration of smart technology in cities is incredibly important. This is best conceived through a critical feminist praxis, which approaches smart city development through the simultaneous promotion of participation in design and localized policymaking. In this way, smart cities can be designed from the outset with a mutual understanding of the ways that marginalized populations are put at risk by the development of smart cities, while also upholding the rights of citizens to ensure transparency and accountability. Enacting both of these approaches concurrently provides the potential for a revitalized approach to navigating governance in the smart city, in which technology is implemented as a method to support communities rather than as a way to extract data from them. Thank you, everybody, for listening to my presentation today, and I look forward to continuing this conversation in London. If you're unable to make it in person, please reach out to me. I would love to talk about this more.